The story begins when a man commonly called Bill approached a communication tower to repair some damage. He saw a dog he recognized there and approached it. Suddenly, Bill noticed something strange on the ground and touched the dust. Unexpectedly, the dust contained dangerous parasites that entered Bill's body and attacked his brain system. Bill started feeling pain. Meanwhile, a woman observing the sky with her telescope saw something strange floating in the air. At the same time, a young boy named Simon heard a commotion outside his window. The next day, the cellular communication tower went down. Luke and Joanne decided to fix the damage. Upon arriving, they saw extensive damage and they felt it would be difficult to fix. However, Luke had already filed an emergency request that morning. Joanne started exploring the place and found something odd. She also saw bloodstains there. After inspecting the situation, Joanne and Luke went to a coffee shop and talked to the owner about what happened that day. Meanwhile, Anthony, who was preparing orders, suddenly heard his dog crying and went outside to check. However, something strange happened again. Anthony got infected with a dangerous parasite that took over his body. Joanne and the coffee shop owner went outside and saw Anthony's dog was dead. Joanne asked everyone not to touch the dog. She would call a vet to check what happened. Meanwhile, Anthony, now infected, continued walking, seemingly without a clear destination. Paul and his friends, who were on their balcony, saw Anthony acting strangely. They also noticed their dog acting odd since morning. A while later, Paul and his friends saw Anthony again with his odd behavior. When they looked around, they noticed other people had also been infected and were watching them from below. Samantha and her children saw Bill standing in front of the library where they were. They didn't know what had happened to Bill. He looked very strange. However, Bill didn't respond. He stood still like a statue. Samantha noticed Bill's hands were covered in blood. Terrified, she closed all the doors and windows. In a different location, Angela approached Joanne and Luke at their office, inviting them to see what she had found that day. They went to a place where a massive explosion had occurred. Joanne thought it was from a nuclear weapon, but Angela assumed it was from a celestial object and planned to secure the area until the communication line was restored. Joanne then left the site and went to the power station. Meanwhile, Samantha, still in the library with her children, looked out the window and saw Bill still standing there. They also saw one of the children, Sunday, near Bill, who was covered in blood. Sunday was one of the children who had been with them earlier. Samantha suddenly realized that Sunday and another child had not returned from the restroom since earlier. Shortly thereafter, Bill left the place. Samantha then took the children out of the room and into another. She asked the children to stay inside and lock the door while she tried to call Sergeant Joanne to inform her of what was happening there. But the cell network was down again. She then found a radio monitor and contacted Joanne, explaining what had happened. Joanne quickly headed to where Samantha and the children were. Joanne noticed how unusually quiet the area was. It was unlike the usual. They began to realize something was wrong with the town. They also noticed Anthony acting strangely all day. Not long after, Joanne arrived at the school where Samantha and the children were. Joanne saw Bill there. She approached him and asked what he was doing there, but Bill did not answer. He remained silent, while his hands were covered in blood. Joanne kept asking questions, and Bill finally said, "I want the other one." Joanne did not understand what Bill meant and asked who he was referring to. Bill then said he wanted the boy now. Joanne then inspected the area. She entered the restroom and saw blood splatters. She looked closer and found Sunday, who had died covered in blood, as if attacked by something. Joanne suspected that Bill had done something terrible to the little boy. She then drew her gun at Bill and handcuffed him. Meanwhile, Albert, the other boy, was still inside the restroom, calling out for Samantha. The boy was very scared. Samantha then took Albert out of the restroom. Joanne asked Samantha to gather all the children and take them to the police station, while Joanne took Bill to the old jail. In a different location, Luke, who had just arrived, saw Anthony acting strangely. He was standing still like a statue in front of a house where Paul and his friends were. Luke then asked Anthony if he was hurt, but Anthony did not answer. He just stared with a very frightening gaze. Then one of Paul's friends, who was on the balcony, called out to Luke and pointed behind him. When Luke turned around, he saw several other people acting strangely. They all seemed to have been infected by the dangerous insects that had infected Bill and Anthony earlier. Meanwhile, Anthony suddenly disappeared. One of Paul's friends informed Luke that they couldn't leave the house because someone had locked the upper room door. Luke then entered the house and checked what was happening. He then unlocked the upper room door and let Paul and his friends out. Paul and his friends rushed out, planning to meet their families. Luke continued to search the house. He saw Anthony inside. Luke kept looking and eventually met Marcia, who said that Anthony wanted to kill her. However, she managed to escape. Luke then guided Marcia out of the house and towards the police station. But before they could move, Anthony, now infected, blocked their path. Luke drew his gun, but Anthony knocked it out of his hands. Luke began to panic and tried to fight Anthony by hitting him hard. Anthony glared at Luke with intense anger, then threw Luke and Marcia, causing them to hit the ground hard. Marcia tried to escape by crawling up the stairs, but Anthony pulled her back down by the leg, dragging her. Luke grabbed the gun and shot Anthony in the leg. Anthony screamed in pain and left them. Meanwhile, another infected man, Dean, was wandering around looking for a victim. He ran up to a house and entered it. He saw a woman inside who turned out to be his own wife, Frances. He approached Frances and strangled her to death. Joanne, who had been following Dean, arrived at the house and found Frances already dead. Meanwhile, Dean had taken their baby. Joanne searched around and then Dean appeared from behind, holding the baby. Joanne tried to take the baby, but Dean, infected by the dangerous parasite, began choking Joanne almost to death. Seeing this, Luke shot Dean, killing him, and took the baby. Soon after, they heard a loud roaring noise. They saw a huge monster they had never seen before. Then a group of infected people spotted Luke and Joanne with the baby. They became very aggressive and chased after Luke and Joanne. They ran towards their car, trying to escape the infected crowd. The number of infected people grew, blocking the road. However, Luke and Joanne managed to get away and headed to the old jail, where they met with a doctor to find out what had happened to Bill. Shortly after, as Joanne was about to leave, Bill suddenly awoke from unconsciousness. He was silent. Joanne approached him and asked what had happened. This time, Bill was conscious and recognized Joanne. Joanne asked Bill to explain what had happened before the incident. Bill realized he had killed his own daughter, Sunday. He cried and deeply regretted what had happened. The parasite had taken over his brain, turning him into a ruthless killing machine. Suddenly, the parasite reasserted control over Bill's brain. Seeing Bill's behavior change, Joanne quickly left the area. Meanwhile, Angela was preparing to leave town but saw a massive dust storm at the border. She had never seen anything like it before. She called Joanne to describe what she saw. Angela then decided to drive through the dust storm to find out what was happening. Meanwhile, Samantha and the children were trapped inside the library, trying to escape, as the infected people began to surround the place, targeting the children. Samantha led the children out and into a car to leave, but unfortunately the car keys fell. Samantha quickly returned to retrieve the keys. Suddenly, a large monster appeared. Samantha was terrified as the monster attacked the infected people. Angela, who had previously tried to pass through the dust storm, reported back to Joanne that she saw nothing but dust there. Suddenly, Angela saw the large monster, and the radio went silent. Worried, Joanne rushed to the border to find Angela. Fortunately, Angela was safe, and they quickly left the area. Joanne started preparing weapons to fight the monsters. Paul and his friends were also there. Michelle told Joanne that she saw something strange fall to Earth this morning through her telescope. However, Joanne was a bit upset because Michelle only informed her now. Simon and Luke then went to see the doctor. That night, Joanne and others who were not infected gathered at the police station. Joanne realized Michelle and her friends had not returned, so she decided to go out and search for them alone. Joanne met Paul while the others were trapped in a restaurant. There was also Grandma Jensen, who had been trapped in her house alone. They couldn't get out. Joanne and Paul went to meet them and picked them up from the place. Joanne asked them to move quickly and stay together. Paul, who was outside, tried to distract the infected people so the others could get out. The infected saw Paul and started chasing him. Joanne quickly led the teenagers out and headed to the police station where Luke and others were. As they walked, suddenly an infected man appeared and strangled Ellie fiercely. Joanne tried to help but was thrown aside. Joanne then shot the man, but the gunshot drew the attention of more infected people. This time there were more of them, and they were more aggressive than before. Joanne and the others kept running toward the police station, while the horde of infected people kept growing. Joanne and the others managed to enter the police station. They were still very panicked and scared. Suddenly, a monster reappeared. The monster carried the infected people and also brought Bill. Joanne, seeing this, fired her gun into the air. The monster looked very angry but soon left the area. Not long after, Angela arrived and urged them to chase the alien monsters. At a corner of the street, they met Michelle. As Michelle was getting into the car, suddenly her leg was grabbed by her infected mother. Joanne and the others tried to free Michelle, but they failed. Suddenly, a monster reappeared and roared loudly. The monster wanted to take Michelle's infected mother, but Michelle was also dragged along as her mother held onto her leg tightly. Joanne then fired her gun into the air, asking the monster not to take Michelle. Joanne eventually used a shovel to force the mother's hand off. The monster left, taking Michelle's mother with it. The monster gathered the infected people's bodies and burned them with fire coming from its mouth. At that moment, the dust storm that had been blocking the area dissipated. The next day, Joanne, Luke, and the remaining survivors saw that there was no more chaos outside. Everything seemed back to normal, and they could resume their lives. And the film ends. If you like this video, don't forget to subscribe. Because by subscribing, you have supported me to make better videos. See you in the next video.